Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to the Rules of Engagement. As always, I'll be your host, Nick axslav ranish, as we take a look at some of the strategies and tactics using the game of Starcraft 2. Today we're going to take a look at a couple of games from last week's Challenger League group stage from WCS America, of course. We're going to take a look at drop-based TvP in Major vs. Bales. We're going to take a look at a classic macro, Terran vs. Zerg in Major vs. Killer, and then a Void Ray Colossi type of game in Protoss vs. Zerg between Maxed and Ghost User. At the end of these three segments will be the viewer Q&A. So if you have any questions, send it to me on Twitter at @isaxslav. Also, under YouTube comments, go to youtube.com/officialmlgsc2. Find any of the more recent Rules of Engagement videos. Throw up any questions on the YouTube comments. I'll answer those at the end of the next episode. So our first segment is going to be drop-based TvP with Major vs. Bales. We're going to talk about an anti-drop build from a Protoss standpoint, observer placement, and also multi-prong attacks. The last one will be more from a Terran standpoint, how to properly execute those multi-prong attacks. So we're going to start the stream play off at the 7-minute mark. And of course it's going to be between Bales and Major. And a couple things we'll note is we'll take a look at Bales' build, right? Both players, of course, open with the fast expansion because that's what you do in TvP for the most part. The classic builds are always, at least they get natural very quickly and then worrying about your attack. Now, from a Protoss standpoint, what a lot of Protoss are doing is they're very fast teching or they're very fast getting upgrades because this Mothership Core can defend any early aggression with Photon Overcharge. But what Bales is doing, he's getting this Twilight Council very early on. And doing this is going to prioritize Blink Stalkers. If you're going to prioritize Blink Stalkers, you either want to get some damage done, like if you watch Huck play, does a lot of very aggressive Blink Stalker builds off 2 bases and tries to harass his opponent and tech behind it, or you need to make sure that, okay, I'll get this Blink fast so I can defend these drop plays in the mid-game very well. But getting Blink this fast, delaying your upgrades, delaying your tech for either Templar or Colossi can have major repercussions in the fact that, okay, your mid-game composition is going to be weaker. You're not going to have the fast 1-1, 2-2 upgrades or 2 armor, whatever upgrades you're going for. Your upgrades aren't going to be fast, and you're not going to have a lot of high-tech, super powerful units at your disposal. So to compensate for this, what you need to have happen is you need to absolutely demolish a drop play, right? Every drop that comes in, you need to slaughter it. And it's not enough just to take equal damage, you have to absolutely slaughter them. So right here, if you're scaring the medevac away, that's not actually enough. You have to be killing the medevacs, you have to be cost efficient, not just deflecting drops. So you can see here, units lost so far is very even. Yes, the Hellbat drops haven't really done damage, but as a Protoss player, if you're going to delay your forges like this, if you're going to delay your tech to Colossi or to High Templar, you need more battles like this, where you actually kill a drop and you only lose, I think, was this 3 probes, not a big deal. If you totally shut down drop after drop after drop, that's going to damage a Terran as much as you're slowing yourself down by getting that fast Blink upgrade, delaying the 1-1, delaying your Colossi and High Templar tech. Another thing to note is that this is a great build to do if you as a Protoss have a very hard time at drop play. Yes, you're going to have a little bit of weaker mid-game, but you'll get through the early game very well. And then, of course, the sentries are so important, so this is where all of a sudden it becomes a little undone. This one drop takes out 3 sentries automatically. It's going to take out a 4th one as well, or at least kill some probes. And now we're in a situation where even if he gets the medevacs, which he's not going to because they have that turbo boost and Blink's not quite ready yet, all of a sudden units lost is, well, he does actually almost get that, is now basically equal, or if anything, Protoss is slightly behind. So this is a bad situation for Protoss. It's not like he's automatically lost the game by being equal, but in a situation where, again, the 1-1 is barely ahead of Terran 1-1 when Terran actually delayed his 1-1 a lot to get Hellbat drops. There's no AoE tech for the Protoss yet. There's no support bay in production. There's no Templar Archives in production. It means the mid-game competition is going to favor Terran. It's okay for Protoss if that happens, as long as they have very favorable early trades by shutting down drops totally. Unfortunately, what's going to happen is it's going to be a little bit behind. Now, the next thing as a Protoss player, what you want to be really on top of is your observer placement. So if you pause it right here and take a look at the units tab, you can see he's got 3 observers, right? He's got 1 observer checking for drops here in the main, 1 keeping tabs on his opponent's army, and 1 providing absolutely no value being with his army right here. A general rule about PvT is pretty simple. It's if you're not worried about cloak, okay, there's no cloak banshee, which he knows. Your opponent isn't using a lot of widow mines, which he can assume because he scouted his opponent's base. He's only 1 factory. He's seen a lot of Hellbats. There's no widow mines. There's no Cloak Banshee. There's no Cloak Ghost. Obviously, it's too early and game fat to come out. There's no threat of Cloak units. You should never have an Observer with your army. It makes no sense. Observer does two things. One, it gives you vision, and one, it gives you detection. Detection obviously doesn't matter. There's no cloak, so only vision matters. But with your army, it doesn't actually give you extra vision because your army has that vision range anyway. So always make sure those observers are in front of your army to give you that extra vision, not with the actual army. On a map like Daybreak, if you have 3 observers, the ideal places to put those guys would be to cover all the different drop angles, right? So he has one really great observer right here. Super, super great positioning. That observer at the top of the map, that guy can't see any drop coming into main from the top of the map, right? The other key observer is he has an observer right here in this area. That observer can see if your opponent moves out with their main army. It sees if your opponent is trying to take their 4th base. It sees if your opponent is pulling SCVs to do a giant attack on you. It sees your opponent's general unit composition. All these important things. It can dip into the main and then back if it wants to keep an eye on the production. Is he going double starport? Is he going for ghosts? Is he adding extra factories to add in a lot of hellbats or something like that? So very, very useful 2 observers. The 3rd observer. It's always good to have 3 observers in PvT if you can afford it, which you usually can in early game. 3rd observer should pretty much always be, if you have 3 bases, right here. Right, and just keep them a whole position right there. There's some people will put it up here instead, you know. But somewhere along this line, one of these 2 locations, either at location 1 or location 2, one of those 2 locations to keep an eye on any opponent going towards your 3rd base from a straight route. Now, of course, you still have to watch for drops along the very edge, but that straight route is the biggest threat where they can send a whole army. Ideally, also, you have this watchtower. If you control this watchtower, all of a sudden you have vision range from here, you have vision range with the watchtower here, and then the other observer has to cover this bottom area, right? So that's why it's so important to have the 3rd observer at the bottom of the map. 1 observer covering the drops in the main, 1 in your opponent's army, and 1 at the bottom of the map. And we'll go over why that's so important later. It's part of defending drops is knowing when they're going to come in. And it's very, very important to have that observer coverage. So, unfortunately, Bales just has it with his army. I think he meant to send it down here, because he's, of course, is a very good player. Keep an eye on it. Also would catch it with him, which would be nice as well. But unfortunately, I think he actually accidentally grouped it with the army, so it kind of got caught along with them. Now, from Major's point of view, Major wants to start doing some multi-pronged aggression because it's Major. That's what he loves doing. He loves trying to out-multitask his opponent. A couple SCVs go the wrong way. They want to join the party. So 1 is you always want to kill those observers as a Terran opponent. It makes it harder for your opponent to keep track of what you're doing. Number 2, we're doing multi-pronged aggression, right? We're actually going to take a look at this thing here again from Major's point of view. You have your main army moving out across the map, right? I think right now he's like around here. But he wants to move around and attack the 3rd base, right? That's his main attack route. Now, he also wants to send an attack to the main, because it's hard for your opponent to pay attention to 2 spots very far apart at the same time. Now, there's 2 ways to do this. One is the way a lot of players do, because it's the most simple. Your screen's on your army, right? What you do is you grab a section of this army, you put it 1 medevac, and you send that up there, right? That's one way. You grab a 1/4 of the army, you have 4 medevacs, 1 medevac picks up units, sends one to drop. The better way, what you're going to see Major does, is all his units that are rallying in here, right? His next 2 medevacs, that's the drop. Remember, your army moves at a speed, if you're not stimmed, that's relatively slow. So while this army moves out across the bottom to attack, if your rally units hit the medevac ignite afterburners, those can go across the top and hit there, and your main army isn't weakened, right? Your main army is still the same strength. Use those reinforcements to do the drop. If it's ever possible to use reinforcements to do the drop, prioritize using the reinforcements in the drop and not weakening your main army. If you weaken your main army, the threat on your opponent's 3rd is weaker, and they can split off more units from a 3rd to defend. If you just use these reinforcements with ignite afterburners to do the drop, then your main threat is still very, very, very strong. He's going to come in here. This is another really quick decision making. After these force fields go down, imagine this: if his main army was weaker, right, and his opponent could basically not have to worry about his attack, and all these stalkers could be in the main, right? But because there's so many units here, these stalkers have to be with the army to prevent the medevacs from saving the units, prevent the medics from dropping other units on top of the army, and just overall defend that location, right? And again, this is also why the observer placement is so important. Now, to drop to the main hits, right, with the reinforcements, Bales needs to send units up here, right? He needs to. He has Photon overcharged somewhere with versus silly areas. So the Mothership Core can get up there eventually before it's an overcharge. He has a bunch of warp gates he can warp units in, but ideally he'd send 2 to 4 gate units to supplement this defense, right? And he'd pull probes in the meantime. What's super important is notice this observer, still with his army. What you want to do as a Protoss opponent, remember how I said it's so important to have that observer out here? You have to keep track of direct attacks toward your third. Because if you had the observer there, he'd see the army coming back, and he wouldn't have his whole army walking up to his main base, right? The observer would have kept track. He could have split off 4. He could have done exactly this. Splitting off 5 stalkers to help deal with this drop. That's exactly what he wants to do. The rest of the units ideally would have stayed to defend this, because right now, all of a sudden, that Nexus is going to go under fire. Once that Nexus goes under fire, you're in trouble, right? Because now playing it out, he's just down by too much, right? He's lost the third base. He's taken some damage in the main, not that much. If you look at the probe kills, he's only lost 11 probes all game, and some of that was some earlier harass. So this drop in the main, even though he wasn't really ready for it, didn't do game-ending damage because he was pretty quick at pulling probes into Hellbats. But it's a distraction that allowed the main army to hit his third, and the reason that distraction worked is because there was no observer guarding this this passageway to keep a track of if the Terrans send a major force at third base. A major force can kill Nexus very quickly. A drop might kill a couple of probes, but you can retreat. A major force can take down the Nexus, and that's a game-ending move, as we can see here. He's down by so much economy. We're just going to X8 the rest of this game. The next attack is just going to be overwhelmed. There's just way too much Tyrion he has to give to third base. He goes to engage. He's able to push Tyrion off for a second because there's no Vikings. And also, Major was splitting up his army to drops. But the supply difference is too big, right? It's 180 food to 116. Another drop in the main, he can barely deal with that. And then, of course, his main army isn't going to have a chance against the third because he's busy dealing with the drop as well. So, overrun there. Major is going to go ahead and win this game. The last couple of minutes were just cleanup. As soon as he lost that third Nexus, really lost the ability to continue the game because he just fell too far behind economy, couldn't produce a major, and a few minutes later, he just got absolutely overrun. A couple key things to keep in mind from this game is, number one, as a Terran player, you saw one of the big things where Major started getting ahead is that one time when the one drop worked well. Because he came with the drop play, he saw the 4 sentries, and he's like, you know what? He has an army there, I can't drop on probes too well, but I can just drop on the sentries, and I can trade a Hellbats for sentries. It's always a great trade. Hellbats kill sentries in 3 hits. If you have 2 Medivacs full of Hellbats, you drop them on the sentries, they'll one-shot all the sentries. And yes, you'll lose the Hellbats, they're cheap. Sentries, very expensive. Protoss is a very gas-heavy race. You take out those sentries in the next engagements, you're going to be in much better shape. Or, like we saw here, Bales had to rebuild those sentries, further delaying that very important Colossi tech. So if you ever see sentries that are vulnerable, and you have an opportunity to, drop those Hellbats on top of the sentries. From a Protoss player's perspective, remember, spread those observers out. Observer on your army doesn't help unless there's cloaked units. If there's cloaked units, get that extra observer, put it with your army, but you need to cover those very important routes across the map with observers so you know if your opponent's moving to your third base, moving to drop in your main, so forth and so on. So this wraps up our first segment. We'll take a short break and be right on to our second segment, a game between Major and Killer.